Welcome to the Josh Button Podcast, where we discuss health, wellness, and outliers from society. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Josh Button Podcast. Today, I am joined by Mr. Quintin Torres, an absolutely fabulous and fascinating trainer who's doing things that, in my opinion, are right up my alley, and most of my listeners who are in this midlife martial arts scene or are wanting to actually perform better regardless of where they're at. Quentin, I really want to dive into Marinovich, but you know what? First and foremost, introduce yourself and tell me how you came about this path of training. Like, obviously, this is not the most mainstream form of training, and regardless of what the performance is proven to produce, for some reason it hasn't caught on quite as much as I think it should. So how did you come about this in the first place?
Really just being a part of like the MMA community during like the early 2010s. That's when like the UFC really started going like global recognition, right? And we started gets like our first wave of real superstars like George St. Pierre, BJ Penn, Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar, when he first came on, he really exploded UFC into the mainstream, being like kind of a spectacle fighter. And, I was always a huge fan. Let me see if I can kind of create a little context behind this. So, like, my family's been involved with like MMA and jiu-jitsu forever. Like, they were doing seminars with the Gracies at El Camino Community College back in like the mid '80s, before when they first moved to the United States, and they didn't really have a spot in Redondo, and so they were pretty hip to it. Like my mom, who's Hoist's father? I keep forgetting his name. The Grandmaster. Yeah, he passed away a
Helio?
while ago.
Is Helio like that?
Helio. Yeah, so she worked with them, and they were doing like self-defense classes. I guess they were trying to like, learn how to like offer their services before they had like an official spot when they moved to the United States. So my parents were always hip to like arm bars and triangles and the guard and stuff like that. They used to teach me that stuff like in the living room. In the early 90s as a kid, I was learning like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and my dad would make me like watch old UFC VHS tapes when like Hoist Gracie and Ken Shamrock would fight for like a half hour and like no one would win. Like back in those early days, it'd be like a bodyguard from Denny's versus like a karate master from Boston. But yeah, I always thought it was cool. I've always been into martial arts. And so after high school, I, wanted to get into athletics more. So my buddy was doing MMA, and I got involved in MMA around 2010, and was just totally addicted to it, addicted to the training, to the culture. I never missed a UFC fight. I had like a bunch of tap out shirts and sprawl shorts. And right around that time, I was also a big BJ Penn fan. And BJ Penn was, of course, legend. He submitted Matt Hughes. He beat Jens Pulver, Little Evil, and he also was like getting ready to fight Diego Sanchez. I think it was UFC like 111 or something like that. And I remember BJ Penn. I've seen BJ Penn perform a bunch of times, but he always had a little bit of an issue. He was like really talented. He was really like naturally gifted fighter, and he wouldn't train as hard, so his gas tank was always an issue. And so when BJ lost to George St. Pierre for the first time, BJ had to go back down to lightweight to defend his title, and he was getting ready to fight Kenny Florian. And BJ, they do like those UFC documentaries, like UFC Prime Time, where they show you the training camp, their preparation. And BJ Penn was doing this fucking crazy training methodology that I've never like seen before, where he's working with like this old guy named Mark Marinovich, and like he's doing like balance training like on these slant boards, and he's moving like this red machine. He's like throwing it around, and I'm like, dang, I've never seen anything like that. And when BJ Penn performed against Kenny Florian, he looked totally different. He was faster. He was really in shape. He had like six-pack abs, and he wasn't getting tired. And he just beat Kenny Florian's ass. Just total one-sided fight. It looked like a mismatch. And I was like, wow, man, whatever BJ Penn is doing, like, that's like, I need to get involved with some of that. I need to start doing strength and conditioning, because I was just doing skill work. It was like very early days of like MMA. And so, that's what really got me into strength and conditioning. And it was mostly like kettlebells and battle ropes and TRXs, and stuff like that. And, I'm trying to like figure out different strength and conditioning methods. And when you're not really educated in it, as a trainer, you kind of really don't know what you're looking for. Everything seems great. So you're just doing whatever you can get your hands on. Then BJ Penn had another fight against Diego like 6 months later. Another UFC primetime shows up, watching the training camp, and he's doing that crazy training methodology again. But they showed way more of it, and I'm like looking at this like what are they doing? Like I don't understand any of this. They're doing like some secret science shit. And then BJ has his fight against Diego. BJ's even better than the last fight. And I was so blown away on how bad BJ Penn beat Diego Sanchez's ass in that fight. Like it was really bad. Like even Diego called me and was talking about it. He's like, "Yeah, man, I've never been beat like that before." And it was just insane. BJ Penn was just on it. It was the best BJ that's ever looked ever. And BJ was faster, wasn't getting tired. You could clearly tell he was like most guys progress in MMA as they win fights, they get more money, they can pay for better coaches, they get more resources. But it takes time to develop. It takes like a couple years to get like good noticeable developments in performance. What BJ was getting like a 5-year improvement in like 5 months. And that's what I really noticed because I knew BJ was in his usual performances and seeing this new version. I'm like, what in the fuck is going on? And that's when I was like, I have to learn this training. I have to figure out how to do this training because I was coming off a loss around that time, my own MMA fight. So when you get beat, you're really eager to find a way to improve. You want to avoid that loss, that pain, of losing a fight. And so after seeing that, I was like, I gotta find this training. So it basically altered my life forever. Where after that, I just started studying strength and conditioning. I quit my job to become a personal trainer because I was thinking like, okay, like maybe I'll get like a National Academy of Sports Medicine certification, from NASM. Like it's the best certification you can get. It's the most expensive. Like it's got to be in the textbooks. I'm going to come across this and I'm going to learn it. And so, yeah. And so, like studying, learning like SAQ, learning the corrective exercise system, like what I call the standard stuff. And I'm going through the textbooks. I can't find this like Marinovich train. I can't find any of this stuff anywhere. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm already like $1,200 deep on this certification. I'm just going to learn it. Maybe it's in the continued education because they have like an MMA course. I'm like, it's got to be in there. Like, let me just get my first certification out and I'll find it. Took the test. Actually, I failed the test twice. I had to take it 3 times to pass. It's a friggin' hard test, and I'm not a good test taker. Eventually got my certification, and, I did the MMA continued education, and it was just not it. It was just, like, very gimmicky, very fitness, and it was also a weird time in the fitness space in those days. You had bucket drumming showing up, you had Zumba, CrossFit kinda was dominating everything, and the Olympic lifting scene was really getting big. So as time goes on, when you can't find something and you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to kind of revert to what you do know, you know? So I just kind of got re-indoctrinated into the traditional system. Kettlebells, battle ropes, maces, and functional fitness, right? Because that was really popular then. And that was back when Joe Rogan was like started on it, with the kettlebell system and like, everyone's doing like maces. So I'm like, okay, like I'll get into that. And I kind of just forgot about the nervous system training for quite some time. Time went on a little bit more, and around 2015, so like 4 years go by, and I kind of forgot about it a little. 4 years go by, and there's this guy who gets on the Joe Rogan Experience, and his name is Nick Curson, and he has a strength and conditioning company called Speed of Sport, and he was talking about his training camps that he's been doing with Rafael dos Anjos, who just won the lightweight title. Now, that fight just happened, and then he was on the podcast, and I remember when that fight happened. I remember RDA was looking so much better than his traditional performances. Because RDA, he lost to LA Quinta, he got knocked out, and he was kind of like a mid-level fighter, like top 15 in the world. And then in 6 months, he was easily like a top 5. He beat Ben Henderson, he destroyed Donald Cerrone, he destroyed Nate Diaz, and I'm like, dude, this freaking Brazilian's on steroids. There's no way you get this good this fast. Like this guy's. I remember me and my buddy were in the car after the B Dubs fight. We were at Buffalo, and he's like, "Dude, this Brazilian is on sauce." And this was when the WADA switched to USADA drug testing in the UFC, and everyone was getting popped. And I'm like, dude, this guy's freaking he's on the roids, man. It's like, you can't get this good. Like, we could not accept that. And then Nick Kirsten goes on this podcast and talks about, yeah, I worked under Mark Marinovich for a period of time, and we've been doing the Marinovich training methodology with RDA. We've been doing it for the past 2 years, and he's now the champ. So he kind of revolutionized his career. Actually, 1 year he was doing it. So he went from like top 15 fighter to world title holder in 1 year, getting that many improvements with his performance. After I heard that podcast, I'm like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. I remember looking for this. After that podcast, I emailed Speed of Sport like that day, and I told him like, listen, I don't care what I have to do. Like, I need to learn this. Like, I will show up to your gym. I will work for free. I'll do anything. Nick Kirsten responded. He said, hey, I'm holding a certification in 2 months. It's going to cost like X amount. Make sure you're there. You got to come all the way to California. I'm like, I'll be there. Got my plane ticket that night, flew down to California, went through the certification process, started learning the Marinovich training methodology, and got certified, quote unquote, at the end of 2015, going to 2016. And I've never looked back since. This has been like my main focus since 2016.
Awesome, bro. All right. A couple things there. One, Marinovich, if I'm not mistaken, he comes from an NFL background, right? He was training NFL players. And all right. So I too went through the NASM.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience, and there was things that didn't add up to me and things that really did, and I applied to my training going forward after I got the certification. One thing that I don't know how it registered with me early was proprioceptive training. And it was mentioned, it was taught, and there were certain things in there that made sense to me, but things that didn't make sense as well that weren't congruent with what I was experiencing in my own training. And I was definitely not training on the Marinovich level or doing any of the actual functional Marinovich exercises that you're showing, but I was walking slack lines and working on balance boards and doing rotational work, trunk work that was from a boxing background on unstable circumstances and environments. And I was like, oh man, there's something to this just because I feel the results so rapidly. And when I came across your Instagram, it really started to make sense. I was like, oh my goodness, I was on such an elementary level of some of these principles. If I was applying the ballistics and applying other, I guess modalities is what I'm looking for, I would have discovered like the results that you're achieving. So for me, when I saw that first time, I was like, I vaguely remember this Marinovich stuff, and I vaguely remember the BJ Penn stuff, but it never really registered with me when I was going through NASM or looking to be a personal trainer and in that environment. When I saw your stuff, I was like, I had the same epiphany you did. I think when you were realizing with BJ and Dos Anjos, and you wanted to learn it, I was like, okay, that's it. I got to, reanalyze and really,
Mhm.
really look at this seriously. So that's the initial reason I had to reach out to you. When you started working this stuff for yourself, did you notice those profound results rapidly with yourself?
Fuck yeah. Yeah, like, yeah, it's pardon me, am I allowed to swear? Do you care if
Oh,
I'm kind of
you use the word.
okay, cool. Sorry, I'm pretty okay. Yeah, dude, it was that was the biggest paradigm shifter for me because I was big into all forms of strength and conditioning. I was doing it all, man. I was smashing freaking alpha brain, like going crazy with battle ropes. Like I would just work my ass off, because I felt a noticeable improvement in my MMA the more I did strength and conditioning, which was a kind of divided sort of thought process back in those early days. It was like some guys thought it was all skill work, some guys thought it was more strength, right? And so when I was blending the two, I was like, okay, I did this kettlebell. I feel stronger in wrestling. I did like the battle ropes. I feel like I have a little bit more endurance, like in my jujitsu. But I would feel like small improvements, right? It would take some time. Like I would have to really work it, do a lot of kettlebell circuits, do a lot of circuit training, do a lot of functional fitness for like a month to feel some improvements the next month. And everyone just gets kind of used to that. Everyone gets used to like, okay, I'll invest 1 month to maybe get 1% better the next month. That's the usual like paradigm. When I started doing this nervous system training, right, and I was barely understanding it, right, I was just copying what I could find on YouTube. and like Nick Kirsten's Instagram. And I'm like just writing notes down, putting it together. I got like a slant board. I made one. I cut some balance pipes. I bought some hand weights from Spry. They discontinued them, but they had some like hand weights and they were filled with sand. And I just started doing plyometrics. I started doing ball work. I started doing the balance training. And me and my roommate, we were both really into it. We were doing like, we did it for like 2 days. Like it was like a Saturday, Sunday. We were just working the system over and over again, trying to figure out the modalities. We were doing a lot wrong or not ideal. We weren't doing like very well. We were just experimenting around. But I remember that 2-day period, 48 hours, we were just really working what we could work out of the system as best we could. When I went into MMA that Monday, I felt such an improvement in my boxing, in my footwork speed, in my coordination, in my reaction time, my ability to like slip punches and counter right back. All these soft qualities that I never thought about training. I never thought you could train this. I thought, you train strength, you train cardio, and everything else is skill. I had no idea there's modalities that actually enhance skill without doing more skill work. And I had a real hard time I had a real hard time getting through like Muay Thai because I had really good kicks. I had good power, but my punching accuracy and precision always lacked. And it would really frustrate me. Like I remember I'd have nightmares that like I can't land my punches, and it was like messing with my head. And I remember when I was doing like ball work training, medicine balls, working the slant board, 48-hour period, just 2 training sessions. I went back in and I could put my hands wherever I needed them to. I was like slipping. I was like, these techniques and these theories were working now. And it was like, that's when everything clicked. I'm like, how did I get better at fighting by doing less fighting? Which was a huge paradigm shift for me because everyone thinks you need to get better at soccer, you got to play more soccer. You want to get better at baseball, you got to play more baseball. No one has this idea that you can do methodology to enhance very soft qualities within your body that aren't measurable. That's why we don't really focus on them in the traditional sports performance world because it's mostly a hard quality based model. Vertical jumps, broad jumps, maximum sprints, those are hard qualities that are quantifiable. But in sports action, movement, fluidity, timing, coordination, reaction, accuracy, neurological control, we can't measure these. We don't have the technology, not really. So we don't really prioritize them. And that's when this whole paradigm shifted. We're like, holy shit, you can actually get better faster without having to do like an hour of sparring and then like 2 hours of heavy bag work. And then the next day you got to do the speed bag and you're just putting so much effort into this to get small little improvements that take forever. You do this nervous system training, you can hyper accelerate those improvements. And it really saves you a ton of time and energy and a ton of wear and tear on your body to get to where you want to be. So that was the big paradigm shifter for me on the improvements that I felt.
Yeah, and people are going to say it's anecdotal, but then you see the differences in your own training, and once more than one person goes through this, and they see the results in their own training, and they see them getting better than their partners who aren't doing it. I mean, there is no denying at that point.
Yeah, well, I always tell people to give up the anecdotal argument. Like, okay, you want to say it's anecdotal? All right. Well, why did BJ Penn get better? Why did George St. Pierre recover from his ACL so quickly? Why did Rafael dos Anjos win his world title? Why did Troy Polamalu become one of the best defensive backs in the NFL? Like, it's all anecdotal. Like, we don't see a pattern kind of showing up, and also at the same time, if you think about physics, the body is going to adapt to whatever physics you hit it with, right? So if I'm hitting it with a certain like parameter of physics to enhance the things that I need in my sport, reaction time, explosiveness, tissue elasticity, all these things that are now a little bit more popular, a little bit more understood, but back then really weren't. If you just think about like the physical principles of what human bodies can adapt to, it makes pretty logical sense, you know, if you can just look at it more open-mindedly and less dogmatic.
Feeling is understanding, and
Yeah.
I had somebody else point this out on a podcast, and it rang like so true for me because I've had this debate with other strength and conditioning coaches who are very qualified in what they do, but look to the studies. They look to the papers and to the measurables, and they go, well, the studies don't really suggest that this has that big of a difference or it plays that big of a factor. And I'm like, look, bro, put myself in the environment and I've put demands upon my body that are really abnormal, weird things. And I've made myself adapt to those things, and it's really carried over into other performance. And to tell somebody that, they're like, okay, let's see the measurable results if that's their world. If that's, in my opinion, if you haven't been programmed with that thought process and you actually just do it, you feel it, you can't deny it, you understand it. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Well,
one of those things that it's really, really hard to have that conversation if they've been indoctrinated to a certain degree to only look to those measurables.
yeah. So here, there's a huge problem right now with sports performance science in this country, and a lot of it is the fault of the NCAA. I'll be the first one. I have no problem going to war with that system because what it does is, like you said, it's an indoctrinating system at a bunch of different levels. We're all pretty aware of how the NCAA is operating, especially when it comes to monetizing their athletes and how they took advantage of their athletes for so long, which now is shifting over. But the NCAA is not interested in developing sports scientists. They're interested in developing competent coaches, right? So it's like a factory. Now, there's a phrase that I was telling my other producer. We run like the nervous system training podcast because he was kind of having trouble grasping this, with the science. I'm like, look, we are not sports coaches. We are sports scientists, and we're supposed to coach our athletes through our science. And now the current CSCS model or, the NASM model, they're not taught to think that way. They're taught to follow a clear, generalized plan that won't get them sued. That's really what a lot of it comes down to. So most coaches are not encouraged to experiment. They're not encouraged to lab anymore. They're encouraged to stick to generalized programming that's safe and proven. So if something goes wrong, you can just say like, "Hey, this is a proven thing that has acceptable losses. So I'm no longer liable." Right? It's like a safety net and it kills creativity. It kills thinking and it kills your ability to look at reality. So what are you going to do? Are you going to believe the studies or your own lying eyes? Right? So that's where it becomes very dogmatic. And when it comes to the studies, I've actually made a ton of content on this. Studies, especially in the university settings for sports science, are being turned out at a snail's pace. It is so freaking slow to come up with a study because, one, when you look at most industries, like let's say physics, there's physics in all forms of privatized businesses, right? They use physics for, like, say, rocketry or developing strength machines or whatever it is. But there was a scientific field to help develop these physics equations, to help abstract new ways of doing things, right? To create a language model on experimentation. Sports science didn't start that way. It actually started at the professional level, at the monetary level first. you know and then it's later become incorporated into a scientific setting at the universities after the fact. So the universities did not develop a channel to develop scientific language and models and experimentation in the West and then introduce it into a privatized industry like everything else. So it started at a privatized industry and now it's been adopted secondhand into the university level. So that's kind of created a little bit of a disconnect with how we think about sports science and how we go about conducting different studies. Now, the second point is these scientific studies are really hard to produce because of how much they cost. They can cost like just let's say a small sports performance study from a Division II college could cost up to $250,000. Now, when you look at like the Soviet Union, they had we just did a podcast with a coach who was born in Russia throughout the 90s. He explained the whole thing. In the Soviet Union, they had government funding, they had salaries, they had spaces where scientists and coaches and athletes can just go to work and figure out how to make this better without worrying about how do we sell this? How do I package this? Do I need a lead magnet to get more athletes to come into the door? That wasn't a thing. They were taken care of. They just said, hey, show up to this building, work your ass off, win us an Olympic gold medal. That's it. And if you don't, maybe you go to jail.
I was going to say, would you say they were incentivized by those results and by that? I mean, I don't want to say it's ego driven, but by the pride in their country that they wanted to.
Yeah, pride and fear. Like there's a when you're in when you're in the USSR, there is a level of fear of failure, because that is huge social status that you lose, positions you can lose as far as like creating like a good career, and it's hard to create a good career in a communist nation. It's not like raises are really thrown around a lot. So having that kind of social status in a communist architecture of society is really really important because monetary development is not a thing, so you're going to attach value to something else. So he had huge incentives to do it. And you had fear because these athletes would literally have to travel with NKVD officers on a regular basis. They would put like microphones in their hotel rooms to see what they're talking about. They would monitor them. They would hire people to dress like civilians to watch to see if this figure skater was talking to anyone. So you're constantly looking over, there's always surveillance over these athletes. That drives a level of paranoia, and if you have that kind of paranoia combined with propaganda, combined with social incentive, you're going to try to do everything you can to win. Now, back to like the sports performance studies that I was talking about, because I remember I talked to his physical therapist who was working with me. She like had an ACL surgery and she wanted to take a different approach for training. And she was a doctor, physical therapy. She had her own clinic, with her own patients, and she was telling me a part of getting her doctorates was she was involved with the first study at University of Michigan Ann Arbor for their hockey team to prove that off ice training improved on ice performance in hockey. And I'm like, off ice training? She's like, yeah. I'm like off ice, like medicine balls and skater jumps and plyometrics and shit like that. She's like, yeah. I was like, what year would this happen? She's like, I graduated 2007. That's when we conducted the study. And I'm like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You saying it took the University of fucking Michigan all the way to 2007 just to figure out that off ice training improved on ice performance in hockey? She's like, yeah. I'm like, the fuck? Like the Russians could have told you this back in the 60s. Like people could have told you back in the 90s. I was like, 2007? Like that's forever. Like how long has hockey been around? Like 100 years? And we're now figuring this out? And I'm like, why did it take so long? She's like, well, these studies are expensive. These studies could take years to plan because you got to get grant money, you got to get approval, you got to go through the chains of bureaucracy at a university, and there's low return on investment. Let's say we took like 10 athletes and these athletes are good. It's not like these athletes are cheap. A U of M athlete, how much is a U of M athlete worth? Like $100,000? So you have these bodies that the college is really investing their money in. And you got to feed the athletes, you got to clothe the athletes, and the athletes have to run their own lives. They got to make it to class. So you got to shape your studies around their lifestyle so they can maintain their curriculum. And then you have people who need to conduct the study. You need consumables, you need heart rate sensors, you need all this extra stuff. And all those people require other employees to maintain the technology. So you have these coaches, you have the people who are running the technology, that's a different department. You have the athletes, that's another department. Then after the study's conducted, it might not even work. We might not get any benefit. So it's a risk. And then it has to get published and it has to get peer reviewed. And you may have to conduct it again against a control group. So this could cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars and could take years before it even shows up in black and white on a published paper. So now that is why the sports science studies are taking forever. And most of the studies that are conducted are very controlled, they're very limited, and they're very isolated. Like one small thing when it comes about like VO2 max training and creatine, right? That would be like one study, and it'll take 2 years to get that study out. And it really doesn't move the needle forward in sports science in the United States. So when you have these strength coaches that are saying like, "Oh, well, the studies don't say it. I don't see the measurements." Like, well, no shit, because the measurements can't happen. We don't have the tech and we don't have the money to pump out these resources. Most of the measurements you're seeing are from 50 years ago. Like they're really old and it takes forever for them to get updated. So you have two choices. You can rely on old text like you're the Vatican Church. You can rely on these old scrolls, on your information, or you can become a scientist again. You can start experimenting because most of the breakthroughs in sports science in this country are from private practitioners, people who have the ability to experiment. They get direct feedback from their athletes. They can run different ideas, and maybe you don't get a huge sample size, but you have the freedom to experiment. That's why the universities aren't inventing anything. Have you ever noticed? They're just adopting things like the
Yeah.
TRX. That was invented by a ex-military guy,
Or their
right?
inventions are being outsourced to a business real quick and being taken up and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, but this I love using the TRX like analogy because if you look in every single strength and conditioning gym in the country, in a college, you're going to see a TRX there. You're going to see a BOSU. They didn't invent these things. Like what method invented the BOSU? The TRX was invented by an ex-military guy. Like they're not producing anything. Well, they'll take a tool that has significant results in society. There's a lot of people around, there's a lot of value that's growing. And then they'll take that tool and now they have the incentive to invest some money to conduct a study to see if they can get a measurement out of it. Once they got a measurement out of it, hey, this actually does help with shoulders. This does help with this. Boom. Then they'll indoctrinate it into the strength and conditioning protocol, but it comes from the private sector. That's where the innovation is happening. And most of these strength coaches don't understand the pattern of how innovation in sports science happens. It comes from the public. A lot of people get results from it. It gets valued. It gets popular. The university now looks at it, will take it on, create a study, get a measurement. Boom! Now it's official because they said so.
Makes me wonder if like the peer review system in itself, like kind of as it has in the scientific world on other areas, is kind of affecting the sports science in that way that, people don't want to step out onto a limb and go against what their peers have already approved or said. So they have no reason to contradict what's out there unless somebody in the private sector comes in and goes, hey, there's big money to be made from this contradiction that we're about to put out there. So, like you said, there has to be some incentive to do these very expensive studies. Are they mostly getting just pressured in by industry or by people that want to make money?
I would say so. I mean, look at the space industry. The universities and governments are not creating technology to go into space. It's all done privately. Even NASA was private sector. So what I think a lot of it is, I think a lot of these strength and conditioning coaches that come through the university system, one, they're in a huge amount of debt. You
They got
know,
to pay their bills.
that's going to weigh on your, yeah. And two, you had to bust your ass in a lot of areas that have no return on investment, like learning chemistry, learning biology, learning calculus, taking all these courses that really don't add up into making you a better sports coach or sports scientist. And then after you finally graduate, you have like the whole, the pride system of your university. You have your CSCS. You kind of have like this pretend authority license in the industry just because you paid money for it. Now, when you are looking at these other experimental training systems, like when you look at what Method is doing, or functional patterns, or Marinovich, when you look at all these other ideas, that's really going to hit your ego in a bad way because now you have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to go against what you paid for. And, you know, especially if you're in sports coaches, we're still highly competitive men. Like we're in the world of intense competition all the time. Our clients are really intense. Like it's intense and competitive by nature. So you combine all these, like, let's say spiritual aspects to it, and then you have like a perfect storm for nothing to grow. And that's kind of where we're at right now, with the sports science industry.
Yeah, so let's talk about nervous system training. And I guess one area to start before you even get into the full gamut is fascia in itself. Because I mean, I've seen fascia post kind of picking up steam. There's a little bit more information getting put out there, but there's a whole lot of confusion as to what fascia is and what the fascia system is and how you can train and like how we adapt in that way. So in your best of abilities, explain the fascia system and how we're not tapping into it with traditional training.
Okay. So the biggest confusion when it comes to fascia, and I ran through this, and there's almost like always keep in mind that as much as people are different, we're really the same. And we kind of run like you do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yes.
Okay. So you know how there's like a pattern that everyone kind of goes through. but no one in jiu-jitsu, like you have your white belt experiences, then you have your blue belt experiences, then you have your, and there's
For
stereotypes.
sure.
So basically, yeah, basically there's like patterns that we all go through, that's like natural, with these natural patterns of progression. So just keep that in mind because I'm going to tap into this, which is why there's such a divide when it comes to fascia. So one big part of the confusion is the language that we're using. Is that because the way the industry makes money, as a coach, you need to market things and you need to create a language to contextualize your product to sell it, right? So you have to say things because the general public is not really well educated in these ideas, right? They're consumers, they're in other fields, they have other interests. So we have to create a language model to translate the context of the product we're selling or the service we're offering. And that's why people are using these words like fascial training, right? Now, everything is working with the fascia. Olympic lifting trains the fascia. Kettlebells train the fascia. Jiu-jitsu trains the fascia. Everything works with the fascia, right? You can't isolate anything. And that's a big argument. You see a lot of strength coaches, they'll mean you can't isolate the fascia. Well, no shit, Sherlock. You can't isolate anything. You can't isolate the bones. You can't isolate the muscles or the it's all fused together. It's all one fluid system, right? So that being said, what fascia training is we're not training the fascia. We're doing modalities to enhance certain mechanisms that the fascia promotes. Now, when it comes to a sports context where elastic recoil, reaction time, aerial recalibration, that's the ability to move in midair, like when you go up for a dunk and you have to maneuver the ball to dunk the ball. All these actions that play a really vital role in sports that the fascia mostly governs those mechanisms. Now, are the muscles a part of it? Yes. Is the skeletal system a part of it? Yes. But the fascial system is more responsible for these mechanisms, for these expressions in sports. So, what we're doing with the nervous system training, especially the ball work and balance training methodology, which was invented by Dr. Edith Hoyce, who wrote Probot X, and I had a lot of phone calls with her. She told me, like, listen, you're working fascial systems more than just muscular and tendon system. Like, what? Like, it didn't make sense to me. But this is where a lot of your soft quality techniques or abilities come from, is mostly the mechanisms the fascia governs. Mostly, not 100%, but mostly. So when you see like these weird like ball work methods, right? Where you see like I'm like doing this with the hand weights on a stability, or I'm doing like the kickbacks, right? Fascia responds to low load. Well, fascia responds to anything. But if I want to enhance the mechanisms of the fascia to promote better sports movements, you need low load, rhythmic movements that is going to hit global chains.
Mhm.
Like when you do like a bicep curl, this is not as global. We're only hitting like one mechanism, right? But if I do my whole arm like this, now I'm hitting more parts of the limb. I call that a global movement. I'm trying to like create terminology to help like understand this. And so when you're working these low load rhythmic global movements, you're enhancing certain aspects of the fascia that assist you in sports movements. That's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to train the fascia. We're trying to enhance the fascia's natural mechanisms in this context. Because the fascia also helps with bracing. The fascia also helps you take punches because it's a non-Newtonian solid. And this is where it gets even more confusing. Have you ever seen that cornstarch and water mixture where it's like liquid, you can run your hands through it, and then when you hit it, it like becomes hard, right? It kind of like bends reality of how you understand things, right? It's a non-Newtonian solid. So the fascia system is the same. It's non-Newtonian solid. It can stretch, become elastic, and harden under velocity. And so it kind of bends the laws of physics as we usually understand it, like liquid, solid, gas, right? So it can become very confusing on, okay, does the fascia help with this? Does it help with that? Do we need to do this with it? It helps with all those things. But if you want certain qualities out of the fascia, if you want certain mechanisms to become more dominant, you have to stimulate it to get those mechanisms to express. And so when you do something like heavy weight, like a deadlift, right? You're only getting the fascia to express slow bracing, slow twitch strength. Now, can it have some benefit like motor unit recruitment, developing of like muscle hypertrophy, muscle density? Sure, 100%. But it's also forcing the fascia and muscle system to become very compressed and to really tighten and to stay tight. It's not teaching it to lengthen and snap again. Which eccentric based movements has more of a lengthening and strengthening process than a compressing and tightening process. And that's why after you do like weight training, you kind of feel like you got to you're trying to get your muscles to re-elasticize because you just compressed them. Now that can take away from fluidity and elastic quality out of your body. It can reduce soft quality expression. Maybe not just after one lift, but it may take a couple months of compression, but maybe it only reduces, like, say, your hand-eye coordination by maybe a fraction of an inch. But in a football game, that's everything. That's the difference between catching the football and it bouncing off your fingertips. That's the difference between a basketball rolling just right off your fingers for a 3-point, or if it rolling a little off and you break it. These little qualities are everything in sports. And the current system is not really worried about that. The current system just wants to focus on what it can measure: broad jumps, vertical jumps, sprints, and VO2s. But their training model is designed to enhance these hard qualities because it makes your athlete more marketable. If you have a great broad jump, you have a great 40-yard dash, oh, he must be good. But you can't measure, like, okay, how accurate can he spiral the ball? How well can he twist rotationally? A lot of this stuff you kind of have to just get a sense for, put them on the field, and you let them fight it out, whoever comes out on top. So I hope, does that
Ab-
kind of help?
Absolutely. My mind goes in a bunch of places, but instantly I'm thinking about like what we're doing here when we're training in that way, and it has to lead to injury prevention in almost all sports, right? Almost all performance. You see it in jiu-jitsu all the time when somebody who has spent time in the weight room and just does those heavy lifts, their movement is not the same. They're stiff, they're slow, they're just they're not the same. And a lot of jujitsu practitioners, especially more experienced guys, will tell you, you want to get better at jujitsu, just do jujitsu. But there has to be something outside that you can't do jujitsu 24/7. And there has to be something outside that can help you perform. And I've noticed this to a very good extent, that my performance has increased with some of these activities that you wouldn't necessarily find a personal trainer offering you in the gym. So when you're putting, let's say, a new client through this, who's in my world, who's done jujitsu for a long time, they're coming to you with imbalances already. This is automatically going to address imbalances. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it's going to help optimize imbalances. Now, I don't think fully correcting an imbalance in some cases might not even be possible, because some people could have these imbalances genetically. It could be the shape of their bones, the way the muscles insert. Like, I have genetic imbalances. Like, all the men on my mom's side of the family has the exact same imbalances that I do. When I look at myself walk, like on camera, I remember seeing myself walk and I see my uncle walk behind me, we're walking the same. And I'm like, okay. Because I used to think like, the NASM model, like perfect, like symmetry. Both obliques have to be lined up, both shoulder blades, no knee valgus. Everything has to be nice and symmetrical. That's more of a fitness bodybuilding philosophy. So when you think about these imbalances, or let's say I'm working with you, Josh. We got to run you through the nervous system training, right? First thing we're going to do, especially in an online setting, is we can't run you through an athletic assessment. Not really. Not like the Marinovich athletic assessment, which is mostly a manual muscle testing. Now, that does help figure out which areas don't look imbalanced, but aren't balancing the right amount of force. So, like, for example, like when we can test like your leg abduction, like we have you sit on the ground, I'll put my hands and both legs have to explode open as hard as you can. And I'm going to feel which one might be lacking. And then also judge, okay, does it have a lot of neurological drive, where it can really keep pushing strength at the whole range of motion, like it's driving strength, but maybe you don't have a lot of fast twitch. It can't like explode fast. It's kind of slow. That gives me indication that we're lacking that fast twitch mechanism, but we do have strong neurological drive. So we got to go more into plyometrics to make these improvements. Now, maybe your right leg can't push as hard as your left leg. Okay, we have a little imbalance there. Let's figure, let's improve that. You need a little bit more strength when it comes to your right leg abduction than your left leg. Because these imbalances, you start leaking force. It reduces your rate of force development. Your F equals ma, your mass times acceleration. In all sports, it's all about force. Power is one thing, but force is more of a is a bigger variable than power, right? Like for example, when you're throwing a combination, like you go 1, 2, 3, 4, you can't put power in every single one, right? And it's not sustainable. Accuracy will break down, efficiency will break down, but it is force. This is rate of force development. That's a bigger factor than just raw power, but it's hard to measure rate of force development. Anyway, so we would run you through a series of modalities, strengthening the feet, running you through the ball work methodology, and we're going to start getting clues on which modalities really tax your system. Let's say like some of these core movements are really hard. Maybe you can do like you can work oblique twists really well, but the pike ups you're just really struggling. So we want to look at why. Let's look at some video footage of you doing the pike ups. What are your shoulder blades looking like? Can you get your arms up all the way? Is your back having trouble going from extension into flexion? Your lower back to your pelvis. So this is going to indicate that we don't have a lot of neurological strength in the core. We got to work on this. This is where you're leaking force, and this is also where you're losing technique efficiency. Now, here's an example that I noticed was another paradigm shifter with my jiu-jitsu. I always struggled uh, with my left side armbar from
Mm.
guard, always. You grab the arm, grab the neck, swing the leg over, try to go into the armbar. Always struggle with it. I always struggled twisting my pelvis and my body over and getting my leg to hook over to lock in that position. It was always difficult for me. Left side, it was easier. Right side, it wasn't. And I would try to just drill it. When you do that boom, boom, and over, doing it over and over and over again. Years trying to get better
Real
at it.
quick, were you a half guard player on the opposite side?
No, 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 no. I didn't like jujitsu. I just like kicking people in the head. So I would just deal with it, like I would just, I would be like, okay. But it also shaped my game. There's another factor where it's like because I struggled with guard, I would avoid it. I would try to keep it standing. I would use a lot of judo instead of wrestling, right? I would want to use my striking. So my weaknesses and my imbalances were literally shaping my style.
For sure.
It's another paradigm shifter that most people don't get. When I got my athletic assessment done by Nick Curson, I scored really poor on my right hip flexor, my right adductor muscle, and my right oblique. This whole side was not working properly. And that's responsible for those are the muscle groups that help you go into your armbar on their left side. Once I started doing modalities to start strengthening those areas and start creating more neurological strength, get the primaries and the secondaries to start working together more efficiently. All of a sudden, like doing these ball work drills, working a little bit of slant board, strengthening the feet, strengthening the oblique that didn't score very high, return to jiu-jitsu, boom, arm bars came easy. And I'm like, okay, I get it now. Like I understand what technique really is. So, and a lot of people don't know how to. They never felt that, or like you said, like how Wim Hof said, feeling is understanding. If you never felt it, you're not going to truly understand it, and you're always going to think there's like this invisible limitation that you can just never get past. But that was a big. Even my striking defense on my right side, all of a sudden I could check faster. So before I'd always have to parry and circle out. I'd circle out left every time, and guys would start figuring that out, and they'd start trapping me with like right hooks or something. Now that I can get my freaking knee up because my hip flexor is working better, my psoas, now all of a sudden I don't need to try to parry circle left. I can just check and I can throw my right hand. I can counter strike. So all of a sudden I had this whole new ability because of this one weakness. Now I can take my style anywhere. I'm not contained on my weakness. I can start expressing new ideas and really start getting creative because now I have a better functioning body.
You're tapping also into something that is critical for guys in my age range. If you're not in tune with these thought processes and you're not willing to train your body in this way, you're gonna inevitably end up with something. like at a little older in life, you're not going to be able to correct. So I've been working this side of my body. I've been playing this game my whole life. I've already got the shoulder, the neck, the hip, everything is compact on one side and the other side is stretched out. And I'm just going to be carrying that around forever until I start actually offsetting it with training like this. And I just went through
Yep.
shoulder and neck stuff like that. So
Yeah. It'll catch up to you. You'll start to because you can overcompensate, and eventually those overcompensations can lead to kinetic breakdown over time. It may take some time, but it usually will catch up to you, sooner or later. So, like I was saying before, I don't think it's about being perfectly balanced, like the NASM or like the bodybuilding sort of style, which some people really, really push for, because that could actually make you worse at your sport too. If you look at like a baseball player, I used to think that we need to balance this athlete out. Everything needs to be equally strong on each side. But if he hits a baseball and he's always rotating to one side and you start to correct that, you can compromise their exit velo. It can really throw off what feels right for them. And here's another paradigm shift that a lot of coaches and a lot of athletes need to understand that sports by nature is destructive. This jujitsu is not healthy for your body. Let's get this very clear. Like if people are like, oh, I want to stay fit, like, no, no, no. Throwing a 90-mile-per-hour baseball is not good for your arm. Never it was, never will be. But it's awesome. So we do it anyway. So the goal with your sports performance training is how can we optimize this imbalance as best as possible so we don't get breakdown, so we don't overload the biceps, so the scapula doesn't completely like freaking fall apart, and one shoulder's lower than the other, and next thing you know, the guy needs Tommy John surgery. Like you want to optimize this and keep it working as best as possible, but just accept the fact you're on your way to destruction no matter what sport you're playing. You are on the way. Ask any high level athlete or anyone who's been doing athletics for 20 plus years, your body is going to feel wrecked. It is inevitable. But, you know, what else are we going to do with our lives? You want to have some fun? Let's hold this shit together as best as we can, have as much fun as
So I
possible.
gave up a sport due to this already. I was paddle surfing for years, and the volume of that board is it's pretty big board compared to what a small surfboard was, and the force you generate on a nice good wave, the waves you want to ride, was pretty strong. And I compacted my right hip so much so, and I happened to be in California, and I was just going through all these really just gnarly hip issues, and my IT band was tight, and my right shoulder was tight, and I was talking to Laird, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I just getting this hip replaced right now, and you're on your way to it." And I was like, you know what? It's not worth it. I switched down to surfboards, smaller boards, and gave up the sport. And I really enjoyed it. But I always thought at that time, like that was my only option was quit it now because of the destruction that I am causing is just it's gnarly in the end game. Like I'm not going to be able to do anything except for get a hip replacement. Is that true?
It depends on the person. That could be pretty subjective. Some guys, their imbalances could be so far gone that it may take like a little bit of time to get them in a position where they can return to sport. It depends on like your age, how far the imbalances are, how much damage is into the tissue, how much cartilage you have left. There's so many variables that go into it. I would say, generally speaking, I would say there's a way to get you back there. If you're willing, but also if you're willing to put in the work, that's another factor. It may take a lot of work, a lot of repetitive work to try to optimize the compensation so it's more functional. So you can maintain your performance in this very specific task. Sometimes there could be too much damage. It could be too much cartilage that's gone. The tissue around the socket and the pelvis could be too worn out. It could be too acidic. The muscle groups could be too short. And maybe they might not respond anymore neurologically. Sometimes you develop gray tendon. Where like the neurology is not reaching that tendon anymore. It's just basically shutting down. There's a lot of factors. Now, some of these cases are more rare. So I'm kind of just giving you like a full spectrum of all the possibilities. But in my experience working with guys, especially your age, we've been able to help a lot of guys return to sport from especially like lower back
Mhm.
issues, scapula imbalances, hip impingements. I remember this guy, Bradley Brandt. this was a big paradigm shifter for me as well when it comes to lower back issues. He was a jiu-jitsu black belt of Pennsylvania, and his lower back was so bad that he would have to roll out of bed like a certain way just to get up because it was in so much pain. And he would try to do side planks, he'd do all these core exercises, right? He's doing all this physical therapy, nothing's working. And so I told him, like, your back is under a lot of flexion in jiu-jitsu. Like you're really compressed like this. It's always being flexed. And you're always training it in flexion or you're training it to be solid. Our backs are designed to are designed to twist and spiral. Even as we run, we're twisting, we're oscillating. It's like, let's get you on some of this ball work training. Let's redevelop mobility and strength simultaneously and see if we can free up the fascial system around your back, the muscle spindles, the erector spinae. Let's see if we can get this mobility back because that mobility creates traction. Traction creates space so the nerve endings aren't so compacted anymore. And it only took about like a week and a half to 2 weeks for his lower back pain to go away just by doing some of the ball work training.
So is that nerve sliding essentially through exercise?
A little bit, yeah, yeah. It's remember, usually there's everything happening at once. There's nerve flossing, there's fascial gliding, there's length and strength, happening. Like it hits a lot of layers simultaneously. But I usually look at it like this: like the more you can lengthen and strengthen something, the more optimized it becomes. Naturally, because we're designed to do like four mechanisms. Like we can throw shit, right? We can take something, we can throw something. That's one mechanism human beings can do. We can carry things for a very long distance. That's like strength. Weight training, that's like heavy carrying mechanism. We can sprint and jump every once in a while. We're not the best sprinters, not the best jumpers, but we can do it. We can do it when we need to, and we can run a really long fucking distance. We can run our asses off. That's like one of our big superpowers. So the less you add these qualities, the less you hit these four basic mechanisms. Heavy carry, slow running, fast sprinting. If you just focused on one, say like the heavy carrying, that's like strength training, like slow twitch bodybuilding. You're going to start running into problems because your body needs to address these other mechanisms. That's how you're going to have the best optimized functionality for your like evolutionary makeup.
So you're as much a physical therapist as you are a personal trainer.
Yeah, I can't say I'm a physical therapist. I'm not a
Yeah,
licensed
yeah, yeah.
practitioner.
Let's rephrase it. As far as licensed and as the system would pertain to it, but in reality, the effects of the training that you're doing are probably
Very therapeutic.
outweighing what you could get from one of those other modalities in itself. Has this changed your perception of trans
Yeah,
NASM for
like to
sure?
yeah, like because well, and I also look like it's really kind of blown apart labels and models when it comes to training and really made me focus on what's actually happening with the tissue. Like I was explaining this with a friend of mine when he was talking about like knees over toes, right? And Ben
Yep, yep.
Patrick with his strength and length, and he's like, hey, well, what do you think about this? He's like, dorsiflexion squats. Like I was like, yeah, it's cool. He's like, well, like why don't you incorporate this? Like, he says he's the guy that learned to dunk after 30. I'm like, take a second and don't look at the modality. Think about what's happening to the tissue under the skin. He's doing deep dorsiflexion lunges, really deep squatting. He's forcing the tendons to lengthen and to develop strength and blood flow. That is helps you develop resiliency, tissue density, so you can withstand more jumping and plyometrics. Not that this makes you jump higher, it will add some benefits, but what's really going on is this is giving your tendons a chance to do more plyometric training, more basketball, more of the very physical mechanisms that will get you off the ground a lot faster and higher. But most people think dorsiflexion squats, he dunks, I have to do that. It's like, no, 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 no. No, you're not thinking about it. You're just monkey see, monkey doing. You got to think about what's happening underneath the skin. What are the principles of use stress? What are the principles of force generation? What are the principles of the stretch shortening cycle? Like what is strength actually doing? Is it really making me jump higher or is it making my tissue denser and more resilient so I can put it through the ringer more? You know, Once you look at it like that, then all of a sudden I just look at strength as a principle, not as strength modalities, but strength principles, plyometric principles, proprioceptive principles. Once you can look at it like that, understand the use stress difference, now you can really get creative and understand what modalities are. We're just trying to enhance certain mechanics out of the body. And we use different tools that will give us the best return on that investment. And that's another thing. The difference between, say, like nervous system training methodology and these other, like, let's say the traditional CSCS. I hate to pick on those guys all the time. But the major difference is that we took Marinovich, understood what the principles are. Now that we can understand the principles where I need a strong use stress response, like an Olympic lift, let's break it down. So it's a strong use stress response. It has an intense eccentric overload, right? So you have the bar and you load and you clean it up, right? That's a big stretch shortening eccentric overload and it forces the tendons to stretch and snap back. And then it comes with a really hard neurological drive that doesn't hit failure. Boom, and you dump it, right? Okay, so we need a hard neurological drive. We need a stretch shortening mechanism, and we need a heavy load. Those are the three stress principles that goes into an Olympic lift. Okay, how can I do that, but in more dynamic ways? How can I do this with a different tool? How can I take this object and create the same stress stimulus out of it? Okay, now I have a new modality. Now I have a modality that gets me to where I want to be faster. Now maybe I can use the super cat machine. And now because it's a bar that doesn't have to collapse on me, I don't have to worry about that safety factor anymore. Now when I jump, I can actually I could throw it up, I could catch it. And then when I go overhead, I can instead of doing like a split, now I can go wide because I don't have to worry about this thing falling on me. So now I can hit, and then I can do 1 foot forward and 1 foot straight. I can do different splits. I don't have to do like these linear patterns, these safety patterns to make the move. I can start getting creative. I can start getting more dynamic with it. Okay, now I can start adding this with, let's say, like a water bag that's like maybe weighs like 20 kilograms. It's pretty heavy. Okay, so less of a neurological drive, but I want to push more of a proprioceptive quality because I want more elastic strength, right? I want more neurological strength. So then I can put like a soft pad under my feet. So the proprioceptive quality is a little higher, but the dynamics of the water bag forces more stability. And I don't have to worry about this steel coming down on my head. So now I can like jump up, I could spin and like do a clean. So now I'm adding more layers of quality onto the drill. And now you see how when you start looking at it as these principles, now it opens up a whole world of creativity and experimentation. And that's the heart of the nervous system training. That's what Marv Marinovich did, and it created the system he has now. But now he's isolated it into modalities that will give you the highest ROI. How much energy I got to put into this and the amount of time to get to where I want to be. So these modalities just have the fastest return on investment. And that's where he keeps it in this contained system.
Creating a whole world of new demands that you can't really find in any of the traditional methods and forcing
Yeah, because
adaptations.
the traditional methods are all about safety first. Because the tool is, let's be honest, like barbells are super fucking dangerous. Like, I think there's the rate of people getting injured with barbells compared to get injured with the sport. Like, I know off the top of my head, 5 college athletes that got injured through barbell training. Now maybe it's not a catastrophic injury like a torn knee or something like that, but a strained back, like their shoulder blade never feels right again. Their rotator cuff fell off from doing like an overhead press. It's so unnecessary to get that kind of
Then
risk.
there's the horror story as well. You've seen the videos online where, I mean, people get their esophaguses crushed and all kinds of weird stuff.
Sure, and it's so unnecessary, like plus here's another thing to think about. Why are we still using a bar? Like how old is the barbell? Is it like a fucking 100 years old? Like they had barbells on the Titanic. Like, are we not gonna update this shit? Like we don't go to war with
Yeah.
muskets. We invent new shit. We got AK-47. We improve things. We invent new things. We add new technology to it. But for some reason in sports science, it's like we're still in the dark ages. Like we like the Romans. There was a time during the Roman Empire. I remember reading about this. For 1,000 years, nothing went forward, nothing went backwards. It was the same shield, the same gladius sword, the same helmet, the same military structure for 1,000 years. They couldn't think of anything outside of that. They were just looping over and over and over again. And that's what sports performance, that's what these the sports performance industry right now, they're just looping. They're not thinking about how do we innovate. They're thinking about how do we keep it the same. How do we stay inside the structure? Anything outside the realm of creativity is heresy, and you're like shamed upon, or they'll make hit pieces on you because you're doing pseudoscience.
So do you recommend people follow your Instagram and actually do some of these things without your on-hand approach and without advice first, or should they come to you, get that assessment, and then
No, start experimenting, start playing around, stop being afraid to hurt yourself. Like start moving around. Here's another like sorry if I get a little ranty, feel free to cut me off. I tend to have a problem with this, but like Jake was asking me about power slap, right? And a lot of people are saying power slap, it's not healthy, the sport doesn't belong. Shut up. Let people risk their health. It's okay. Like it's okay to look at skateboarding. Is that healthy for you? No, there's no return on investment, very little. And the chances of you fucking yourself up are super high, but it's engaging. And people want to feel engaged and they want to risk their health for engagement. So I'm not a big believer of, you have to be super careful, you have to do this the right way. Like, no, jump right in, start messing around with things. Your own body will assist you in safety. Like something will not feel right. Like, oh shit, I shouldn't do that. Okay, let me do it a little slower. Like, you have built-in safety mechanisms. It's not like certain training modalities, like you're gonna wake up and both your ACLs have melted away. Like you were pretty durable. We don't really get hurt that often in training if you really think about it. So I tell people experiment, go for it, dive right in, mess around with things. If you get stuck, you don't know how to progress it, then reach out for help. There's a lot of people who are willing to help.
yeah, people thought I was a little bit nuts when I started with the slack line because I raised it as far as I did off the ground. But after you start doing it a little bit, I was telling people it adds a different element to it. There's actually consequences to it, and I stay focused more, and it created something else for me that I enjoyed more. So I will definitely be telling people to go to your Instagram. I am your avatar. I am a jiu-jitsu practitioner, combat athlete. Right now, tell us, why are we coming to you, and when we come to you, what can we expect?
Okay, so why you should come to me? Well, for one, like I'm trying to create a space for what I think is like the forgotten athletes, and that's the older guys. Like so many coaches want to train like the young NFL, like they want the sexy vertical jump guys. They want the upcoming basketball players. And in my experience, training a younger professional athletes is a nightmare. It's a huge headache. And I'm only saying this because I know I was a huge fucking headache in my 20s. I would have hate to have worked with myself, like coaching myself at 22, because it's just the nature of young men. It's the nature of young athletes. But there's a bunch of older guys who are still doing the damn thing, who still want to go fast, who still want to go hard, and there's no space for them. So that's why I created the space because one, I work really well with older guys. We make a ton of progress. There's a lot of wisdom to be had, so I feel like each client I have, I'm coaching them, but I also get a little bit of mentoring about life at the same time. And we make a ton of progress. At that stage in life, their bodies are wrecked. They've been doing the strength and conditioning system for so long, and a lot of them feel like it's failing them. So I offer like, here's a better solution. Let's try a better way of training so you can literally start feeling younger again. And most of my guys, 72 hours, they're rolling better. They're feeling looser. The mobility is back. Their chronic pain is going down. In just like 3 days, neurological development happens really fast. So that's why I created the space. So if you're an older guy like Josh, you need help, man, like let's do a little work. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what parts of your body we can fix. Like I would say it's be the best investment of your life. If you still want to roll, you want to feel younger, want to get the mobility back, get the stiffness away because we're going to dehydrate as we get older. Yeah, this training, it's like it works like clockwork. We're just like fixing old dudes over and over and over again. And we got a really good system to address it. It's just the results are phenomenal. Change your life, man.
Awesome, brother. I will certainly be sharing with the community, putting everything in the show notes and leading them your way. But also I'll be talking to some of my buddies at the gym. And I've got a couple in mind right now who just need to listen to the podcast and get turned on to your Instagram. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I would say that just start trying stuff. Tell your boys I put free modalities on my Instagram all the time. I throw as much value out there as possible because there's not a lot of information on this stuff. So I'm trying to make the stuff that I wish I had when I was trying to figure this training out. So, go onto my Instagram, you see a couple modalities, give them a go, work them. You'll notice a difference. You'll start feeling a difference the next day, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So, yeah.
That's for sure. All right, brother. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Appreciate the work you're doing and everything you're putting out there. The education is great, and yeah, I'm looking forward to more.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. Thanks for having me, man. It's been a lot of fun. I'm glad you got it. I hope I didn't talk too much. I'm a
Actually,
little
we could
ranty.
probably go on for another hour or two, but this show format is a little bit constrained, but I appreciate it. Thank you, Quentin.
No problem, Josh. Thanks for having me.